Hey everyone, this is Andrew from Schmidt's Custom Arms. Today we're going to be talking about the Winchester SX3. We're going to be doing a disassembly, reassembly. So let's get started. So first what we're going to do is we're going to remove the magazine cap. Once that's removed, we can slide off the forearm stock and then remove the barrel. Next, we remove the piston assembly and the sleeve assembly and sleeve spring. Next, we're going to depress the lock on the mag spring retainer, and mag spring will come out, and also there is a plug. Alright, now we're going to remove the bolt assembly. First, what you're going to do is remove the bolt handle. It just pulls out, and the bolt assembly is removed. Next, we're going to pop the pins on the receiver to drop the trigger group out of the receiver. And that'll just pull straight out. And right there I'm removing the magazine tube follower. You can do that when you remove the magazine spring. Now we're going to remove the butt pad. What I use is a paste. Basically that's frog lube, the CLP. I put it on the screwdriver so that way I don't rip apart the rubber on the butt pad. Now what we're going to do is we're going to remove the butt pad plate, and then right here is going to be the nut and washer for the buttstock bolt. Once those are removed, the buttstock will remove, and we'll take and set it to the side. And that's just a plate that goes in there for the nut to screw against. We'll remove the shim. That's for if you want to adjust the toe in or toe out, or the cast on, cast off. So now we are going to remove the action spring retainer. You just pop out that pin and it will unscrew. Watch out for that spring, it is compressed and your parts could fly out. And we'll pull out the action spring follower. And that's something that you're going to want to clean That's something that you're going to want to clean once every 1 to 2 years. Next, we're going to remove the cartridge stop carrier latch. We remove the clip first, then we drive the pin from the top down, and once that pin is removed, the whole assembly should fall out and disassemble. Next, we're going to disassemble the trigger group. So we're going to remove that retainer pin and push out the carrier pin. Once that's removed, the carrier assembly will be removed, along with the carrier dog guide and spring. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to release the hammer. And we're going to remove the trigger guard bushing in the front that holds the hammer on. Now we're removing the disconnector trigger spring. there it goes. What we're going to do is we are going to remove the rear trigger bushing pin, which will allow us to raise the arm of the trigger up, just like so, and the hammer will be removed. Now we're going to take and remove the trigger. Simply drive the pin out, and the trigger is removed. So here we're removing the sear and the sear spring. And with some coercing, the sear will come out. Now let's remove the plunger spring for the safety. And I use needle nose. It seemed to work pretty well. It's just getting a hold of them that's the difficult part. But as you can see, it comes out. And you're gonna want to make sure you know which side that was on, because this is a trigger group where you can switch between left and right for the safety. And this one's set up for a right-handed shooter. So now that that's complete, we're going to move on to the bolt assembly. So the top piece of this that I just removed is considered the bolt. The bottom part is the breech block slide. What I'm doing here is I'm removing a pin for the plunger, the operating handle plunger. And while I was taking this apart, it wasn't coming out very easy. So instead of trying to get it out aggressively and actually pull the plunger out of there, I just coated it with some degreaser and then re-oiled. So here what we're doing is we're removing the firing pin, retaining pin, and that comes out with the firing pin and the firing pin spring. Next we'll remove the extractor pin and the extractor plunger and the extractor spring. And now the bolt's fully disassembled. As far as the breech block, I didn't go too in depth with it. It's pretty self-explanatory as far as what needs to come out. I didn't want to mess with the spur on it. I believe it looked like it was riveted in. And here's a list of all the parts for the trigger assembly, all the small ones. As you can see is a close-up of the safety down in the corner. And so what we're going to do first is we're going to put the safety plunger in and then the safety. And now we're going to put the safety spring back in. And once again, I use needle nose for this. It just seemed to work a whole lot easier doing that. The biggest thing is getting that plunger to fall into its track on the safety. If you don't, it keeps popping up like that and making it difficult for you to put that spring in place. Once it's in the slot, you want to make sure that it's all the way to the bottom. That way it won't walk out or cause any interference when you put the trigger group back in the receiver. So next what we're going to do is we're going to install the sear and sear spring. Pay close attention to how that spring loops through the forward hole on the sear, and then the rear hole, the one that's facing towards the buttstock, is going to be the hole that you're going to slide the pin through. Now you want to make sure you use the right pin. The trigger pin is a slightly smaller diameter than the sear pin. Now what we're going to do is we are going to install the trigger assembly and the hammer assembly. So first I put the trigger in there and then I put the hammer in. I used the trigger guard bushing to hold the hammer in place, and now I'm trying to get the trigger lined up with the hole so I can insert the pin to retain that. So now I'm going to insert the rear trigger guard bushing and then the trigger spring and disconnect spring. This spring's a little more difficult. I would recommend inserting the rear portion of the spring, which is the longer end, and trying to get that seated before pulling it to the forward arm where it's going to be holding onto. And we're just doing a systems check, make sure that everything's working properly before we continue with the rest of the reassembly. Next, we're going to be working with the cartridge carrier. So what we're installing here is the cartridge dog, or the carrier dog and guide. And so you want to put the round end towards the rear of the trigger guard with the arch, with it arching upwards, as you can see. And then it's just kind of messing with it until it gets into place. Pin that is attached to there, to the carrier dog, the pin that's going to go through, does have a half moon, so it's only going to be able to orient one way. And just keep that in mind. And finally, with the trigger group, we're just going to reattach we're going to put in the retaining pin for the carrier pin. Close-up of it, how you should orient it. Here's kind of a brief look of what things should look like inside the action. So next we're going to be moving to the bolt assembly. Here's a list of all the parts for the bolt. So we put in the extractor spring and the extractor plunger, put it on top of there. We're just depressing that so we can get the extractor in place. I'm using that punch to retain the extractor and align the holes so I can place the pin in. Now that it's set in there, I'm going to use a nylon hammer to knock it in, and the nylon wasn't working very well. So I switched to the brass. you go. Now that that's in place, you can see that it works. Let's install the firing pin spring with the firing pin. Just drop that spring in there, get it seated right, and then press the firing pin in place. Now we'll insert the firing pin retainer pin into the bolt. And we'll tap it in with a nylon hammer. You will just have to adjust the firing pin every so often, just to make sure that you are lined up where you need to be, just like that. Alright, and this is just demonstrating how to place the bolt into the breech block slide and how it operates inside of it. Now we're going to insert the action spring into the rear of the receiver. That string's very, very heavy, so it'll probably take a couple times before you get it set where you want it and are able to thread the retainer onto the tube. Just be careful your parts don't go flying, being that spring is very strong. So now when you're twisting it in, you're going to want to line up the holes. I just twisted it in to where I could see that it was lined up. There it wasn't quite lined up, and I wanted to go one more rotation. Then we just insert the pin. We're going to tap that in with a nylon hammer. Now that's done, we're going to put the shim on the rear of the receiver and slide the buttstock into place. Next we're going to want to put the buttstock washer in place with the prongs pointing up. And we'll insert the buttstock bolt nut. We're going to tighten that. And we're going to get it snug. I tend not to want to over tighten my screws. Just knowing that it's a buttstock and it's made of plastic, it can break and snap, and there's a whole bunch of other things that can happen. I just like to get them nice, tight, and snug, but not over tightened. Now we're installing the buttstock plate, and now the butt pad. Once again, I'm using Frog Lube CLP to keep from tearing up the rubber of the butt pad. You can use a lot of different things. Vaseline is one. Johnson's paste wax is another. That one's just a nice one. I had it right there, and so that's what I used. Now the buttstock's reassembled, we'll move on to installing the cartridge stop carrier latch. And this is a very difficult part to reassemble. If you're not super confident with disassembly reassemblies, this might be a part that you might not want to take off regularly, because it can be quite difficult because you're working with two springs and they're fighting each other and you're trying to find a hole. Once you get it in place though, you'll slide the pin in, and then you'll want to take and put the retaining clip in there. Next, we're going to attach the trigger group assembly. This is pretty straightforward. Just drops in, make sure none of your pins are in the way, and you go until the holes are lined up. Now that my holes are pretty well aligned, I'm going to tap the pins in with the nylon hammer. Now that that's complete, let's move on to inserting the bolt assembly. The tail on the back end of the bolt assembly needs to fall into the action spring follower. They'll mate up, and once they mate up, you'll have spring tension. Once you have that, insert the bolt handle, and that should just pop right in there. And then run it back to make sure that it works, and to allow for the bolt to allow for the barrel to be assembled onto the gun. So we're going to put the magazine tube follower in first, followed by the magazine tube spring. And of course, this is a long spring, and as it compresses, it gets stronger and stronger, and it can be kind of hard to hold on to. So just be mindful of any parts that are on the end of it, so that if it does spring, you don't have parts going flying across the room. And now I just want to make sure that the bolt lock is lined up with the hole in the magazine tube, so that way it will retain the magazine tube spring. Now that that's done, we're gonna slide the sleeve spring on, followed by the sleeve. And it's got a pin on the far side to align in the receiver. Next, we installed the barrel, and that should just slide right on if the action is back. If the action is not back, pull it to the rear position and then put the barrel in. Next, the forearm, we'll slide right over that full assembly. And lastly, we'll attach the mag cap, and that will tighten the forearm and barrel and everything all together. Now that the gun's all put back together, we're going to run it through a systems check. So I want to make sure the bolt slides forward, and it does, and that the hammer releases. Everything looks like it's working good. Hammer does not release when the bolt is back. Let's check the safety. Safety was working. So this is the Winchester SX3 disassembly reassembly. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you could, subscribe to our channel and help support us here on YouTube. I hope to see you next time here at Schmidt's Custom Arms.